Union City. I'd been away so long. Now I was back. The city looked different, beautiful, peaceful, happy.
I was hoping to meet you, Mr. Grundy.
My dear husband is back!
Is everyone feeling aspirational today?
But I was on the trail of a child, brutally abducted from his village.
Beware! Demons stalk the cat by night!
What's happened, Foster? Where's my son?
And nothing in the city was what it seemed. Luckily, I wasn't alone for long.
Foster! What the hell kept you?
Together, we tracked the missing kid. A trail that led to the true darkness at the heart of Union City.
Yes, we are alive. Welcome, everybody, and especially you. I mean, now the introduction is coming by Güven Hoca. Welcome. And Güven Hocam, it's all about you now. Please introduce our visitor. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. It's great to have Charles Cecil with us tonight. So I guess I'm a bit excited about it because we've been talking about this with Charles. I don't know, maybe almost over 10 years. I remember that we have met in Berlin, Tovadis Expo, the conference like at maybe 2010 or something like that.
Yeah.
So from that day, we had keep in touch and we like ran into each other in some other events, and Charles says that he's always a fan of Istanbul, and I invited him several times, but I guess so. This is the time, but I just before the talk, I promised him that we will also have him again after the pandemic, and we will have him here in person this time. So I guess it's kind of like a bit silly to introduce Charles because like he is a kind of a living, let's say, legend. Just like our title of this talk, like from Broken Sword to Beyond the Steel Sky. So he and his team, Revolution Software, covered a lot of let's say legendary adventure games, which inspired a lot of other designers and developers like throughout the decades. I just want to like share a very little memory. Just like after I played the Broken Sword, like the first one, I found myself in Paris, like looking for the Templars. Actually, really, like I was trying to find the locations of the game in Paris. In a way, the game I think had the series and the other games I think had a huge impact on everyone like who live these days. But it's not just old times. Revolution Software is still very active. Actually, they released their let's say the sequel of Beneath the Steel Sky, Beyond the Steel Sky, on several platforms and also on Apple Arcade, which is I think a very important thing. So today we'll be moderating this session with Ertuğrul, but also Can Oral from Celtic Games. So let me give the word to you, Charles. So welcome again. It's a great privilege to have you here. So I'm like very proud to share like this intro.
Thank you. Lovely. So what I was going to talk about today was a sort of history of the games industry told from a very subjective perspective, so forgive that. But in particular, how we've written adventures terrifyingly over 40 years. So what I'd like to do, if we can go to the first slide, the second slide. So this was in Europe certainly, or in the UK, This was the beginning of the home computer boom. It was produced by Sir Clive Sinclair in 1981, and it had 1K of memory. Now, 1K of memory sounds ridiculous, but actually I shall show you something. I should have done this before, shouldn't I? My 1K chess. Oh, it's disappeared. But we actually wrote a chess program in 1K. And I didn't realize at the time, but it was considered to be absolutely legendary. And it got beaten only a year or two ago in terms of the size. And it actually played chess. It wasn't just simply moving pieces. It was quite extraordinary. And so, and while, you know, the idea of a black and white, simple 1K machine obviously sounds pitiful today, for us back in 1981, the reason it was so exciting is that it was the same power and had the same memory as the computers that landed Apollo 11 on the moon just a few years earlier. So it was, you know, absolutely extraordinary, and a generation of computer game developers really emerged from this, of which I very, you know, it's been a huge privilege, but I was one. But it is very scary this year, 40 years ago. So if we could move to the next slide, please. So this is the first game that I wrote. Because this isn't running, you can see that behind there's a simple, in fact, I'll show you the picture of it because I've got it here. This was the first game that I wrote. You can see that, oh, well done, fantastic. You can see that the font is, you know, really cliched. That lorry at the top, why on earth we decided, I came up with that, I drew it, I remember, it's just rubbish. It's just everything about it is rubbish. The game is, the spelling is absolutely dreadful. You can see there, I can't, I can also see, I can't do that. You know, can't should have an apostrophe. I shall tell you stories about this a little later, but basically it was just an incredible time because we had a small but very dedicated community, and we'd meet those people fairly regularly. So can we go to the next slide? Lovely. So this is a picture of a friend of mine, Richard Turner, who actually founded Arctic and then invited me to be involved. And he was the very definition of a bedroom coder because he coded in his bedroom, and that's where the whole industry came from. And these people, the programmers, they had nothing to follow. So they and we were complete innovators back in the day. Can we go to the next slide? And then this is how we communicated with our. This is me with a lot more hair than I have now. This is how we communicated with our community, our audience, by just selling games fairly regularly at what we called microfairs. And it was absolutely fascinating because we got to meet the people that were playing our games. We got to hear what they liked, what they didn't like. And you know, I didn't realize at the time what a privilege it was. But there was one particular man I remember who came to see me, and back in those days, people always bought the computers. They told their wives, because they were always men, they told their wives that they were buying it for the homework for their children. And he came up to me and he said, "Look, I managed to convince the wife that I could buy this computer, and you know, me and my son played it, but your spelling is so bad." He said, "You know, my wife saw and realized," I'll turn this off, sorry, realized that there must be something wrong because I told her it was an educational program and she saw how bad the spelling was. So I was blown away on that. But it was really fun. And from about 3 or 4 years, we had this incredible bubble in the UK that was writing games and exporting them to Canada, where they had Sinclairs, exporting them to other European countries. And for that short time, it was just an amazing time. But very quickly, American and Japanese companies realized that we were that they were losing out on commercial opportunities. And when Activision was one of the first got involved and set up in the UK, it really very, very quickly all the UK cottage industry bedroom coders were blown away. So that was a brief period, but it was absolutely amazing. Just for my personal, it all kind of collapsed, and well, it didn't collapse, but it all went down, and we just simply couldn't compete with the big American companies. And I worked for a company called US Gold that some of you may know. It was a tough job. My first job was converting Outrun, and I had to go and play the arcade through several times just to make sure I knew exactly how it worked. And US Gold, this was about 1987, 1988. Was one of the leaders of, in fact, it was the leader in arcade games. And then I worked for Activision for a couple of years. And then the old version of Activision collapsed in the very beginning of 1990. And that's when I founded Revolution. So if we could go to the next slide, please.
Okay. Charles, yeah, if I may, I just want to ask something like, what about the pop culture in the UK? I mean, does it support the, let's say, the evolution of like video games, like in terms of building communities, like maybe in pubs?
The pub. Well, nice. Right. In that case, I shall tell you. Thank you. That's actually a great question. So Richard, the person that I had the picture of, we were both sponsored by Ford. We were both engineers. And I'd recommended that we go for a run. So he turned up and he was wearing his running stuff, and we went for a run. He wasn't very fast, and we came back. And then he said, we should do this next week. So I said, yeah, let's do it next week. So he turned up and he said, and it's a pun on English. He says, we're going for a run in the car. We're going to the pub. So I had my running stuff on, but I got into the car and we drove to the pub. And the reason we went to the pub was to play Space Invaders. And we loved playing Space Invaders together. We were both like 18 or 19. And we started talking about video games. And he then invited me
the
to
arcade
his
machine was in the pub, sir? The arcade was in the pub?
Yes.
Yeah. Cool.
Yes. So what you had was the tables, the flat tables. What you do is you buy your beer, and you'd have your beer on the side of the tables, and then you'd have two-player Space Invaders, and then two-player Galaxians. So this relationship with Richard was absolutely all about meeting in the pub and enjoying arcade games in the pub, and then talking about arcade games in the pub. So yes, pubs, I have to admit, slightly embarrassingly, are absolutely central to what we do. So that was just fun, and you had some really talented people. I mean, one of the interesting things is that you probably know ARM, which was sold to SoftBank recently, which is based in Cambridge, and as you know, ARM chips are in most mobile phones. They're an incredible company, but they're now called advanced. I think they're called Advanced RISC Machines. But they used to be called Acorn Research, because they were the ones that created the BBC Micro, that was obviously distributed by the BBC. And the programmers, the British programmers, had 1K of memory, and they had cassettes, while the Americans had 16K and floppy disks. They had so much more power than us. And that's one of the reasons why in the UK, we focused on machine code and really getting down low with the assembly language. And the Americans were always going for higher level languages, because they had the memory and the processing power not to need to really go for the metal. And that, even to this day, that really defines a big difference between, and I don't know about, in Turkey or even the rest of Europe, but certainly, and I think actually probably Europe. Europe tends to be excited about really hitting the metal and getting low, low, low. And the Americans prefer the flashier, sitting at a higher level using less efficient code, because they always had faster processors, and they always had more memory. So fast forward to 1990, and Activision was beginning to collapse, and I was really, really wanting to get back into development. I felt the company at Activision Activision were distributing Sierra titles, and it really felt to me that Sierra had kind of lost their way, that they were amazing a couple of years earlier, but there was so much more that could be done. And so, Revolution was really started in as a competitor to Sierra. And what we wanted was the idea of a much more dynamic world, which kind of sounded a little bit naive at the time. But if we could go to the next slide, please.
What was the first adventure game that really affected you, Charles?
Oh, what a nice question. The first adventure game, it would. Do you know what? I mean, obviously the Sierra games, but the one that really inspired me was a game from a company called Level 9. And it was called The Raj. And I don't know if it ever released. But what they were doing was while Sierra was creating very simplistic graphics, what Level 9 were doing was producing really, really interesting graphics. They were using the fact that the screen on an Atari ST had, I think it was 32 colors, and those 32 colors included the sprites. And you can see from this slide that there's a very specific style that emerges from this. So if you look at the screenshots, the two screenshots, the style is very much defined by the limitations, both of the resolution and of the number and of the palette. And
sure.
So the people that drew this, I think, were extraordinarily talented, because clearly they had to get, like the programmers, they had to get an enormous amount of detail with very few tools. And so the subtlety with which they colored their pixels, the subtlety with which they then drew the sprites so that the colors would be very suggestive, because we just didn't have the resolution to be too specific. So no, it was very much driven by the constraints. And one of the things at Revolution was that I felt very passionately that women were depicted really, really badly in video games. Now, you can argue about whether that's the case or not now, but then it was dreadful. It was really, quite shocking, even by the standards of the 1980s stroke. Yeah. And so it's sort of slightly ironic then that Lure of the Temptress, which has slightly, a provocative name, was called. But I'd like to just briefly tell you how that came to be. And that was that when we were working with our publisher Virgin, the head of marketing, Alison Beasley, phoned me up and she said, "Look, we've got to come up with a name for this game." And I came up with loads of names. Probably they were all a bit rubbish. And at the bottom, I put Lure of the Temptress. Why? I said, I have no idea. And I put as a note, we can't call it this. And she phoned me back and she said, "We love Lure of the Temptress as a name. We have to call it this." And I said, "Look, Alison, there are two problems. One, there's no luring, and two, there's no temptress." And there's a silence. And then she said, "No, I promise this." And she said, "Can you put one in?" I went, "Well, I could do." So they gave us an extra 6 months. And because they wanted the game to be bigger anyway, they gave us an extra 6 months. And in that 6 months, we rewrote the story completely to include a temptress and luring. So, I mean, for anybody who plays it, it does feel very disjointed. But it feels disjointed because it was written to fit a title rather than the other way around. But I mean, the game, well, actually, as an aside, it was originally commissioned by a company called Microsoft that was owned by Robert Maxwell, who was the father of Ghislaine Maxwell, who's currently been arrested in the US. So, the family is always in the headlines. Sorry?
All right, I remember the name.
Yeah. Well,
Ghislaine.
Maxwell was the girlfriend of Jeffrey Epstein.
Epstein, right?
Yeah. So anyway, now this is nothing to do with this, but it is interesting, I think. Her father, Robert Maxwell, had a British newspaper called the Daily Mirror that he bought, and his business empire, was collapsing. So what he did is he stole many, many millions of pounds from the pension fund of his employees. And Ghislaine Maxwell went off to New York after he died, and she was very poor, and suddenly she became rich. So everybody speculates that he had hidden all of that money that he stole, and she was, then spending it. But I don't know. Anyway, that's got nothing to do with this. So here we are, 1992. The game comes out. I mean, we were very lucky. It was very well received. It felt very innovative. One of the things that I've learned, in my years, is that we have a wonderful, sophisticated audience, and they love innovation, and often they're very forgiving of mistakes as long as you continue to innovate. And so that's kind of been my mantra. You can't get everything right, but as long as you innovate, then people forgive you. And you can see some of the reviews there. We were getting, reviews in the 90s. It got best adventure. So it was a really great start. I remember just before we released it, Virgin had invited me to give a presentation. And it was the first presentation I'd ever given for Revolution. I was really embarrassed. And there were people from Cinemaware, there were big publishers. They'd got an incredible group. And I gave this talk and I demonstrated the system, which basically allowed you to give commands to your helper. And there was silence at the end. And I went, oh, God, it's all gone horribly wrong. And then people started clapping, and then they stood up and everybody queued up to want to talk to me. And it was just amazing. So I remember that so well. So that was our first game in 1992. So if we can go on to the next one. Our second game is called Beneath the Steel Sky, which we're better known for, released in 1994. And that was written with a comic book artist called Dave Gibbons. Dave is best known for Watchmen, and then more recently Kingsman, and many others along the way. And the interesting thing is I actually met Dave at Activision. In fact, I talked to him when I was at Activision because we wanted to get the rights to Watchmen. And it turned out that he didn't have the rights, but we sort of kept in touch. And I got back in touch with him, just when we were starting on this game. And I was absolutely thrilled that he said he'd love to do it. So his contribution to this was to draw the backgrounds in pencil, and then they were painted. But that was what we originally took him on for. But he got really excited and he got involved in the story. We gave him a copy of D-Paint, Deluxe Paint, which was a sprite package, and an Amiga, and he started creating his own sprites. And Dave was just a fantastic partner in the project.
Charles, he also did the logo, right? He also did the logo,
he
right?
He did do the logo, yes.
That is a fantastic logo for its time.
It's very iconic, isn't it? It's very iconic. Our publisher at the time, Virgin Interactive, were very advanced. They were a great partner, I have to say, and they were super ambitious for us. And you can see that we went to number one. Again, we had high 90 reviews, and it won awards. So we were really pleased with that. Oh, look at that! That's the comic book. Oh, good for you. Good for you. Yeah, that looks very familiar. That's the original. Is that the original? That's the original comic book, isn't it? Because that's got the advert in it.
Yes. Well, I'm kind of have the it was from the 25th anniversary collection box.
Oh, was it? Oh, right.
Okay.
Right. I thought because it's got an advert that right. Anyway, okay. Oh yes. Well done. Good. Thank you for getting that. Okay, so as I say, Virgin was super ambitious. They were a really good friend and a good publisher. So could we go to the next slide? So our third game was Broken Sword, which is the game that we're best known for. And you can see that the technology allowed us, well, it allowed us 256 colors, which felt extraordinary. It felt like, an unbelievable amount of memory. But also the resolution, a whacking 640 pixels by 400. But there were several things that really helped me in this. The first one was that the layout artist I'd actually met in Dublin when I was looking for animators. And he looked at some of the layouts that we produced and he said, these aren't good enough. I can do much better. And I thought, what a cocky little so-and-so. And I said, okay, show me your layouts. And he absolutely blew me away. He could draw so beautifully. He'd had a lifetime of experience working at the Don Bluth studios. And his name was Owen Cahill, and I owe him a huge debt of gratitude because he was very much pioneering. He would chase and he'd ask why we couldn't do things, and he drove people nuts. Not me, because I liked him, but the others. A number of the others got really quite frustrated, but I just made sure because for example, he asked if we could change the angle of the screen. And we said, no, of course you can't, because the sprites are drawn at a certain angle. He went, but could we try? We went, Owen, no. He went, go on, let's try. So I said, okay, send us some examples over. And he sent, one angle like that, another angle like that, and we put the sprites on, and we were just blown away because it looked fine for both. Because ultimately, what we're trying to do when we write these adventures is not to reflect reality. What we want to do is push. We want to push the style to a point at which it still looks believable, still looks acceptable. And that was very, very much what he did in terms of pushing the perspective, pushing the angles, creating mood. He was absolutely fantastic. The other person that I collected for this, obviously we had the team that had come forward from Beneath the Steel Sky and Lure of the Temptress. So we had some really very good sprite animators. A guy called Steve Odes in particular, who was absolutely fantastic. But the other person that was important to all of this was a composer called Barrington Phelan, who wrote music for a television series that some of you may have heard of called Inspector Morse, which is certainly very popular in the UK, and a number of films. And Barrington and I had actually played cricket about 5 years earlier, and become friends and lost touch. And I got back in touch with him, and he said he'd love to compose the music for it. So, one of there are many things that made Broken Sword special, I think, but certainly the layouts and the music were two of those. Wherever possible, I like to collaborate with really talented people if I can, because it just makes such a difference, provided those talented people accept that primarily it's the gameplay that's important rather than rather than their specific art. And both Owen and Dave Gibbons and Barrington Phelan all were very, very respectful of the gameplay. Good. Should we go to the next one?
So was Broken Sword, the first Broken Sword, was it the first game that actually used high fidelity audio when compared to MIDI kind of music?
It was the first of ours. Yes, certainly.
Yeah. In your portfolio, sir. Yeah.
Oh, in our portfolio, yes, absolutely. Yeah. So, recently for Beyond the Steel Sky, we've actually published a remastered version of the opening music to Beneath the Steel Sky, which is very synthesized. The funny thing is that there's a lot of love for synthesized music, and a lot of people produce synthesized music. But again, the point about it back in the early 90s was that because we had no memory and processors were so slow, that was the best that could be done. And so there was a sort of innovation now. And while it's great to recreate that sound, to me it doesn't have the authenticity that it would have when ultimately it was being produced because of the limitations. So 1997, we weren't, and we wrote Broken Sword 2. We were at that point. It had been decided that adventures were on their way out and were about to die. So we were told that unless we could finish it in a year, Virgin had no interest in publishing it. So we agreed to finish it in a year. The funny thing is that I spoke the PlayStation 1 came out in 1996, so the same year as Broken Sword 1. And I knew somebody at Sony, and I asked them if they might be interested in publishing, and they weren't enormously interested. But I went back to Virgin, and Virgin said they absolutely weren't. They said, the audience for PlayStation was, teenagers and early 20s. It was visceral games in 3D, and that this was not of any interest whatsoever. And then to add to that, I was in California and I had lunch with the head of Virgin, a guy called Martin Alper, who told me that the reason that he made such great buying decisions is that he'd never played a video game. So what we had is, it's dreadful, isn't it? What we had was a bunch of, the people, the industry leaders, who frankly had a contempt for their audience, and that was widespread. These people didn't actually play games. They had a contempt both for the medium and therefore the audience. So I went to Sony, because Virgin said they had no interest, and asked if they wanted to publish the game, and they weren't enormously enthusiastic, but they did. And the reception was phenomenal. So in those days, I don't know, in the UK now, if you even in America, if you have a circulation of like 20,000 a month, that is really pretty good magazine circulation. In those days, the circulation of the official PlayStation magazine was 600,000 in the UK alone. And the game, which nobody thought anybody would have any interest in, got 9 out of 10 in the French, the German, and the UK official PlayStation magazine. But even better, they were cover mounted. So we had probably between 1 and 1.5 million people that had the opportunity and then went ahead and actually played the game. And that, while we didn't realize it at the time, was one of the biggest boosts that we could have. And it really collected an awful lot of people who have remained fans ever since. It was the serendipity. It was the serendipity of convincing Sony, and they might well have just turned around and said, no, it won't work. And they were blown away. And then Virgin was so convinced that they were right in that they actually then turned down Broken Sword 2 as well, which went on to sell exactly the same number again. I think they sold like 600,000, which in those days was massive. So the game, had come. It had completely defied the expectations. But back in those days, obviously games were sold at retail, and retail was supplied by publishers. And the publishers had absolutely decided that adventure games were dead. So after Broken Sword 2, there was really no scope to write any games for quite some time. I mean, what I would say is that there were some brave people. Gabriel Knight 3 was written in 3D. I mean, it looks absolutely terrible because the graphics cards just couldn't support it. And what you went from was, the beautiful graphics of Gabriel Knight 1 and 2 to graphics which simply couldn't convey the emotion and the expression of the characters, which is kind of part of the point of playing an adventure game. So can we jump to the next one? Oh, I've got ahead of myself here. Yeah. So this is the PlayStation, as I say, which really, in many ways, unwittingly, was the reason for the death of the adventure. Because, as I say, publishers were refusing to commission adventure games. Retailers presumably didn't want to stock them, and that meant that we really had to go quiet. So if you think that it was 1997, we didn't actually write another game. We did some conversions. We worked. So revolutionary lots, but we weren't in a position to actually write our next game until 2003. If we could jump to that, and that was Broken Sword 3, and that the reason that THQ was prepared to publish that was that it was a move to 3D. It kind of felt like a console game, and
Yeah.
a lot of people love Broken Sword 3. A lot of people say that they prefer Broken Sword 3 to Broken Swords 1 and 2, but the majority of our audience really, really enjoyed the 2D look, and so it was a big jump. And in many ways,
me as well. I remember buying the third title, this game, and I felt a little bit off when I realized that there were also some action sequences as far as I remember. Is that true, Charles?
yes, yeah. There were.
Mhm.
I think we'd all been impressed by Shenmue and the QuickTime events, and it
Yeah.
wasn't. I mean, we plan to bring this back at some point soon. So tell me, should I take out the QuickTime events?
Personally, I'm not a fan. I'm not a fan. I know
Okay.
I can see that they have a use in games like Detroit Become Human, like the games that Quantic Dream produces. But overall, I'm not a fan personally.
Okay. In that case, thank you for that. That's really useful. But what we did need to do though for Broken Sword 3 and wanted to do was to make it so that the game felt like it was a 3D game. So it wasn't just a 2D game translated to 3D, which is why we put all of these things in. I mean, also the box puzzles were ridiculous, and I feel ashamed of them. So when we re-release it in some form, the box puzzles will be scaled right back. I promise you. So I mean, our problem though was that we wrote Broken Sword 3. We were paid by THQ for the cost, and unfortunately, we've been paid in dollars, and we didn't hedge against the currency. The currency plunged in the middle of development, and we had to borrow a lot of money. We had to borrow several £100,000 to finish the game. And meanwhile, it sold about 16 million and about $16 million in Europe, which, if you do the maths, earned THQ between $4 and $5 million profit. So we found ourselves as developers, as independent developers, in a situation where we were writing games that we were having to borrow money from the bank to finish, and the publishers were making many millions of dollars profit, and it kind of made no sense at all. And we became financially very weak after Broken Sword 3. If we could jump to the next slide. We then partnered with a company called Sumo Digital, who are based quite close to us, for Broken Sword 4. But it wasn't ideal. The development wasn't ideal, and frankly, again, we didn't make any money. So we found ourselves at the end of Broken Sword 4. If we could go to the next slide, please. We found ourselves with a huge bank overdraft, no money in the bank, and interest to pay. And actually, so what I did was I worked freelance. I worked on the Da Vinci Code, which was kind of interesting, since a lot of our fans think that Dan Brown's Da Vinci Code must have stolen the ideas from Broken Sword because of the similarities. And then I also worked on the Doctor Who, which I really enjoyed. So it was kind of fun. So no complaints. But this was very much to pay off the overdraft that we'd built up, and and also feeling that it wasn't fair. That we should be writing these games that was so successful for publishers, and we're actually losing us money. It's not good business. But then, as this incredible industry that we love changed, so if we can go to the next one, this was extraordinary. The iPhone came out in 2007. As I say, Revolution was in a very weak position. And somebody from Apple phoned us up and said, "We think your games would work really well on our platform." And that was a seminal moment for Revolution, because they promised they couldn't give us any money, but they said they would give us good coverage. They could give featuring. And so we brought the original Broken Sword, director's cut with some additions, and we brought it across. And you can see, if you can read that that it has a Metacritic of 90, I think it's 92% or maybe 91%. And the idea that a game could come out 13 years later, 12 years later, sorry, no, 13 years later, 1997, could come out 13 years later and still be commercially successful was unthinkable. Back in 2000, so back in 1998, I knew that none of our assets would be needed. And so I went and I dumped them. I dumped a whole lot of DAT tapes with original assets on them, which now seems insane. But back in 1998, it would have been unthinkable to think that actually a game would have any life after it was no longer in retail. It would have been unthinkable.
Yeah.
So the game was, sorry, yeah.
So that's why there are some redrawings, like new illustrations that you had to use in those remastered editions, sir.
Yeah, well, so in what we did, because we did a version on DS for Ubisoft, and they asked us to expand it. So we did expand it, and some fans like that, some people don't. But what we did do is go back and look for some. We did have some high-res screens, and when I say high-res, they weren't actually very high-res at all, but they were higher res than the 640-400. So we were able to go back and get some screens and use those. And we also had the music at 44 kilohertz, but the voices were all at 11 kilohertz mono, because that's what we had to compress them onto. Because if you bear in mind that for the original Broken Sword game, it was on single speed CD, and data doesn't come off a CD very fast. So therefore we had to compress it really, really hard so that we could feed the data off fast enough. So the game was very successful on Apple, and we owe Apple a huge debt of gratitude because we were effectively bankrupt, and they came along and they gave us a new platform. I mean, the other thing is that the reason that we never recouped from publishers was that effectively we were getting about 7 or 8% of the retail price, but against that was deducted all the development costs and other things as well. With Apple and now with Steam, we're on 70%. So we get 10 times the amount back, the percentage. Obviously, we need to pay for marketing. Obviously, we need to do the funding. But publishers were deducting the funding from anything they paid us, which is why, under the system that we had no choice but to follow, we were, we were actually losing money, and they were gaining. They were making significant profits. So this was a fantastic way of changing. And as if we go to the next slide, as if that wasn't enough, it became completely clear how things had changed when we were invited to be part of something called the 12 Days of Christmas. And this is where a game is given away on one day, and then a film is given away, and then a music album. And it was really a promotional thing. And I was really loathed. Actually, that would be really good if you could pull it down. And I was really loath to do it. But at the same time, when Apple asked us, you don't turn Apple down. So the sales, yeah, thank you. That the one above are the number of downloads. Now, admittedly, that big spike is free, so we didn't earn any revenue. But that big spike is 2.5 million. So a small developer in the north of England that was almost bankrupt had downloads of 2.5 million on one day, and Broken Sword went into the top 10 most tweeted keywords in the world. It was absolutely amazing. Everything kind of changed. Everything went wild. And the reason I've got the chart below it is it's to show the sales level. I was worried that when people got Broken Sword 1 for free, then that would kill the sales. But actually, excuse me. But actually, the sales rocketed. And the reason they rocketed was because the market, even at that stage, was so big that it was actually all about the exposure, the oxygen of exposure by Apple, rather than lost sales. So even though we'd had 2.5 million downloads, and that meant that 2.5 million people who might have bought the game didn't, a huge number of people then went on to buy it. And it was quite clear at that point that the rules of marketing and sales had been ripped up forever when it came to digital. And it was also quite clear there were going to be massive, massive changes. And I'll talk about free-to-play in a minute, but that was really a real wake-up call. And it also really excited us, because one of the guys at Apple told me that the publishers were lobbying to have 2 app stores, an app store for them, and then a sort of indie app store for developers, which would, of course, have sidelined us. And he turned around and he said, why would we want to do that? Why would we do it? And that was, I mean, thank goodness he did, because obviously what the publishers wanted to do desperately, having lost their control on the route to market, is they wanted to, regain it on the App Store. And Apple, bless them, decided that they weren't going to have anything to do with it. So that was really, really important. So if we could go to the next one, please. Okay, so basically from a position of strength, which was just great, we decided to publish or self-fund Broken Sword 5. We could afford to do a prototype, and that worked really well, and that was exciting. And then we decided that to fund it, rather than going to a publisher, which is what we would have done, is we would go for a Kickstarter. So could we try on the next slide to see if the Kickstarter movie actually works? Could we have some audio?
As we do not have the audio.
Oh, okay. So basically what I wanted to do was to convey in 20, 30 seconds, 1, this is hand drawn. 2, it's going to be high res. And 3, that it's going to be hand animated and hand drawn. 4, George and Nico are back, and 5, to get the sort of quirky humor. So the obviously I'm going to have to talk over the audio. So the idea is that George and Nico are it's the beginning of the game. We have a storyboard where a guy comes in with a gun and shoots. Somebody's dead. They steal a painting. Obviously, that was done because it was so much cheaper than actually animating, and we couldn't afford to animate it. And then we go back, and then from the side you get, and that's a wrap.
Mm-hmm.
In a moment. Yeah, and I hate the sight of blood. And that's a wrap. Oh, I keep doing it too early. and so obviously breaking the fourth wall, the idea, and this is where I talk to George and Nico and basically tell them about the Kickstarter and the fact that unless we have our fan supporters, then I'm afraid their great story is never going to make it. And as you can imagine, that went really well with fans, because fans had not seen anything for years and years and years, and an extraordinary group of people kind of came out and were really, really excited. We'd had the opportunity to build a relationship with and build up our community when we re-released Broken Sword 1 on iPhone, and I had no idea who our fans were, because we'd not had indirect communication. And I asked Apple if we could launch the game at their at one of their shops, one of their stores, and I remember the store manager going, "Well, we've got Robbie Williams next week. We've got the cast of the Vampire Diaries in 3 weeks, but in 2 weeks, if you can make it, then we're free." I went, "Yeah, that's great." And we were very poor. I said, "How much will it cost?" He said, "Oh, it won't cost anything." And so we organised the launch at the Apple store in Regent Street. It was really, really prestige. It was absolutely fantastic, and so many people came. I mean, hundreds of people came. They were queuing outside. People had flown in from Europe, from around Europe. It was just unbelievably exciting. And as I say, we had absolutely no idea who our audience were. We knew nothing about this whatsoever. And it was really great. So this was, very, very much part of the comeback for Revolution. Because while the guys at Virgin, Martin Alper, could turn around and tell me that the reason he made great purchasing decisions was because he'd never played a video game, he was also telling me that games that you won't ever have heard of is what I should be writing, and not adventure games. He hated adventure games. There was a game which maybe you will have heard it. I remember in particular a game called Creature Shock, which was like a sort of FMV game. And they were trying to say, this is what you should be writing. This is what you should be writing. But anyway. So I think we should jump over so can we jump to a couple of, let's jump a couple more. Great. And yeah, okay, there, that's fantastic. So what was absolutely brilliant was that we were able to engage with a big community. We had, let's just go back. We had 15,000 backers, incredibly passionate. In fact, I shall show you something. One girl created this sort of porcelain goat and something called the Order of the Goat. And the reason was in celebration of a puzzle in Broken Sword 1 that's considered to be particularly hard. I've got no idea why people, how they can not get it straight away. But it was a difficult puzzle involving a goat. And I remember why I came up with it. And it felt like a good idea at the time. But I'm not sure it was. But anyway, so she produced 50 of these goats, and they gave them to us so that we could auction them as part of our Kickstarter. There was this incredible camaraderie. And then I'll put that there very carefully. And then she dropped them off, I remember, at our studio. And she said, "Oh, there's an Order of the Goat meeting this evening in York." And I went, "What?" And again, people had come. About 20 people had come from Europe just to meet up, to all get together, and nobody had actually even told us. So it was extraordinary that the community had kind of just taken on a life of its own. It was absolutely amazing. But the game sold well. It was very heavily supported by Apple, which was great. If we look at the next slide, and you can see it went to #1 in most territories, and we were thrilled. And then they're rather boring, the next slides, because they're just showing that we then produced it on gazillions of other platforms. In fact, we produced it on ultimately on PC, Mac, Linux, Xbox, PlayStation 4, iOS, Android, Apple TV, Switch, and one other platform that I can't remember now. So it was 10 platforms in total. But yeah, that was great. That was great. So if we could go on to the next slide, please. So this was our return. I mean, I love writing Broken Sword games. I kind of felt that it was probably important to write something else as well. I'd been talking to Dave Gibbons about a sequel to Beneath the Steel Sky, and we felt that the time was about right. And this would have been, it was released, so it was about 3 years ago. So around about 2017, 2018. And it was absolutely fantastic to work with Dave again. What we wanted to do was, what we did was go back and say, what do fans expect and what do they want? Because the two are not the same. What we need a game that feels familiar. So we obviously need Foster. The relationship between Foster and Joey is important. Oh, I forgot there was a film there. Let's play that. So yeah, this is the Apple Arcade launch video. So Union City, I think there had been so much time, 25 years between the two games. So it's important to go back to Union City. It was important to have Joey. There were certain there were certain. Oh, there's a little bit of music, isn't there? There were certain constraints, but one of the things that we'd created in our early adventure games was something called virtual theatre. And virtual theatre is the idea that characters will respond to the actions of the player affecting the world. And so we put in the ability to hack systems, and that would then cause characters to respond accordingly. And in doing so, you could then get through various puzzles. So the game was very ambitious. It felt, in some ways, maybe it was too ambitious because we certainly weren't able to achieve everything that we wanted to. But I mean, the other thing is that we released the game middle of last year, and we were under pressure. We had to release it then. It had bugs, which meant that the reviews scores, were mixed. But what I'm thrilled by now is that we fixed everything. People are generally surprisingly accepting of bugs. It's not something that I feel comfortable about doing at all. And the game is now getting really, really good reviews. I'm very proud of it. I'm pleased. So if we go on to the next slide, I wanted to show you this because to talk about a little bit about Apple Arcade, because Apple Arcade is an incredible intervention. They said when they first announced it in March last year that they were spending $500 million. Obviously, they've spent a lot more since. So let's say they spent $1 billion, and I have no idea, but let's say they spent $1 billion on Apple Arcade, which completely transforms the landscape for developers. And yet they're worth $2 trillion. So $1 billion is less than 1%, less than 0.1% of their value. So to them, this is just an absolute thimble of money. And it is interesting that as these big companies like Amazon might suddenly decide that they're going to seriously intervene in games in the way that they had previously. And clearly they are a massively rich company as well. So as a developer, all we can do is look to the horizon, look for things that are changing. Apple Arcade came out of the blue. I knew about it year before last, so 2019. We met Apple at Gamescom in August 2019, and they talked about it, and it seemed like too good to be true, because they were prepared to substantially fund development, but we're not worried about the game appearing on other platforms. So that left us, in a very strong position. So once again, we feel that we owe Apple a great debt of gratitude. But the reason I'm showing you this chart is that it's showing free to play over, and we don't have more up-to-date figures, I'm afraid, or I haven't been able to find any. But you can see that over, and this goes back to 2013, so the figures will be a lot more extreme than this. But even in 2013, you could see that the free-to-play was becoming more and more prevalent on mobile. And if you look at that tiny slither of $5.99 plus, or $5.99 plus at the top, we were selling Broken Sword 5 for $10. So we were existing in that tiny space at the very top, that strip that's too thin to even see. But the market is so big that actually, for a small developer, we're perfectly comfortable with that. Particularly since on PC, people are still very happy to pay, and likewise with console. So for us, this was a really, really nice opportunity for income. So I guess the next thing is what's next. Now, in fact, I'll jump over the what's next, unless you want to ask me specific questions, and I can't really say what's next because we're keeping quiet about it. But it wouldn't take too much brains to say that you know, that I'm very fond of Broken Sword, and it would be great to do another one of those fairly soon. Beyond the Steel Sky's done very well, and obviously it'd be lovely to do an original game as well, although scary. So it's definitely one of those three. But what I'd like to do is just jump to the next slide, please. Okay, now, has anybody seen this? Does anybody recognize this? I'm sure the answer will be no. It's called the Mappa Mundi, and it's in Hereford Cathedral. So if you could make if you can make anything out of that, then I'm very, very impressed. But if you could go to the next slide. Okay, the reason that you couldn't is, first of all, it makes no sense. But secondly, it was rotated through 90 degrees because they didn't take the north and south particularly seriously. But this is a map of Europe. And the map of Europe would allow you to sail from, you know, anywhere, in this particular case, from London, you know, into Palestine. So Jerusalem was considered to be the center of the world. So if you look in the middle, there is that sort of dot. I don't know if you've got a cursor that you can move over there. Just up a bit, up. That's it. So that is Jerusalem. That's the center of the world. Now go up left, up to the left. There, that's it. That's Scotland, Ireland, and England. And medieval sailors from 1300 would very, very happily use a map like this to sail from London down the Thames, around through and into the Mediterranean, and looking out for all of those. And the reason I show that is that I do think that things are changing so fast. And I think for young people coming into the industry, obviously there are many things that are very hard, but there are also the most spectacular opportunities. And those opportunities are ones that get thrown up by massive changes, which are disruptive. And so I would say that a map like this is interesting because it shows the way perfectly well, and it's much better than no map at all. And yet, when you look back at it, you know, in hindsight, it looks extraordinarily simplistic, and naive. And I think that as things change as rapidly as they are at the moment, this is the map that we're looking at, and you know, a new generation will redefine what the map really is. And that is me. Thank you. Yeah, I don't. I've got other stuff at the bottom, but it doesn't really. No. That's, the rest of the stuff is stuff that's kind of just been put there in case I wanted to reference it. So don't worry about that.
Okay, great.
Good.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks a lot. So I think let's have some comments, or let's say I guess the audience like watching us. I think they also have some questions. So maybe let's start with them.
Of course, that would be lovely.
Yeah.
Sure.
If there are any.
If there are any. Yes, I'm checking for the Twitch. Yes, it's a question time. If you have any questions, please. Now it's time to type them down. And Volkan, do you have any questions on Discord?
Okay,
I actually have a question.
Oh,
okay.
okay.
Yeah, please do, John. Yeah.
So when I think about your games, I always see some kind of a big emphasis on a storytelling style which is reminiscent of cinema, movies. So, like, what kind of movies really affected you to tell the stories that you told in games such as Broken Sword?
Okay, thank you. So when I first wrote that Adventure B, it was called Inca Curse, and it was directly copying the opening of Indiana Jones.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so which I'm embarrassed to admit, but it's true. Obviously, it didn't, because you don't get the stone, but it was very much inspired by that, by collecting treasure inside a pyramid. And the interesting thing, I guess, is that genre is important, and the adventure is called the adventure because it is similar to the film adventure, the genre. And you need to, well, you don't have to, but if you're going to write an epic adventure, which is what we do, obviously there's plenty of scope for fun and funny and quirky and slapstick. But if you're going to write an epic adventure, a lot of the rules that apply to film also apply to us. And
Sure.
there's an American screenwriter called Robert McKee who's written a book called Story, and he gives lectures. And I remember a friend of my mother's said, I was talking to him, and he said, you should go and see Robert McKee. And Robert McKee is, he's pretty arrogant. But what he talks about is film structure, and it's absolutely dynamite. And clearly, we don't want to write films. That's not, if we want to write films, we'll go and write films. What we want to do is something much more interesting. We want to write a story in an interactive way. But I was enormously inspired by what Robert McKee had to say in conjunction with those wonderful adventure games, particularly the first 3 Indiana Jones films. It says the stream has ended. Am I still there?
Yeah. We are listening to you.
Oh, I see. I'm so sorry. The stream is the PowerPoint. Yeah. Okay. I thought I'd been cut off in my prime. So yeah, no, I find. I mean, I have to say, I do feel a bit stupid for having to admit this, but Tenet is very interesting as a science fiction film because it's got so many new ideas, and I think the films that play around with perception, like games as well, are always the most interesting ones. So as I was saying earlier, it's always trying to innovate and trying to come up with new ideas. But yeah, I think it's those classic adventure titles are the ones that I really would say are the most relevant and the most inspirational.
Mm-hmm.
Can I add to that question?
Please.
Yeah. I recently read the pitch of the pitching of Broken Sword. So in that first paragraph, like you are saying that it's kind of like a modern Indiana Jones, but
right.
But you don't want to make the mistakes of Fate of Atlantis. But at that time, Fate of Atlantis was also a very a very successful game. So in what aspect, like you want to, let's say, you don't want to make what were those mistakes like you mentioned? Yeah.
How interesting. I don't remember. I have to say, I don't remember saying that at all. I thought Fate of Atlantis was really good.
It's great, man.
So sorry.
Great, really.
Yeah. And I think it would be very. If I did say I didn't want to make the mistakes of Fate of Atlantis, then I was being very arrogant because Fate of Atlantis is a really good game. I mean, it does have some mistakes. I think that the fighting mechanism was a bit crude, and I'm sure there are a lot. But broadly, I think that when at that time, I think LucasArts were just genius. I have to say, of all of them, Day of the Tentacle was my favorite.
Even the opening sequence of Fate of Atlantis is great, man. The levels that you have to travel through while the credits are still rolling. Yeah.
No, I guess I guess you were just saying that you don't want to build the story around the artifacts, but I guess you want to build the story around the characters, like the Nico and George, like that, I suppose.
Oh, how interesting. Yeah, well, what with Broken Sword and the game that we're writing now, it's really a case of, I mean, if we were writing a linear story, it would be so much easier. So much easier. What I do is through the various processes, I get really excited by the historical background and the core story. Then I get really depressed when I can't make it work. And then, I look at the motivation of the antagonist, because if you're going to have a threat, the antagonists have to have a major part, and you need to know why they're motivated to make them credible. And the audience now, I think, is a lot more sophisticated than it was 10, 20 years ago. And when you play an adventure game, you're looking for clues in the story, in the environments. So while films can have the most enormous plot holes and they can sort of skip over them skillfully, we can't, because players will look into those plot holes, think that they're significant, and look for reasons that they might help them solve the puzzle. So I would argue, you notice I'm being very skillful at avoiding your question about Fate of Atlantis. I would argue that actually writing a game for an adventure, a story for an adventure, is so much tougher than it would be for writing a film. That's not to say that great films don't have the most brilliant people, but we just have an extra dimension that we have to account for.
That's actually very interesting because when I think about developing an adventure game, I see that like the player is always in a perceptive state, as you mentioned. So there are some things that you can just avoid while you're working on a linear kind of a story. But what I like to say is one of the toughest things are separating crucial information from the background information that you create. And your games have interesting methods of doing that. So when you think about like writing for an adventure game, like what kind of tools do you use to emphasize something? And I'm not mentioning cutscenes and stuff like that. I'm talking about in-game situations. What kind of tools do you use to emphasize crucial information? And
okay, well, what we do is we assume that our audience is intelligent, which they are, and so we give hints. What people do when they, much more so than in a film, is when they get a new character and they talk to them, we will put in hints as to effectively setups, which will then have payoffs. So it's what's done in films, but in a game, because you're working so hard to move forward and solve the problems, it's all about setting up and paying off. And one of the golden rules is that if you have a character and you don't quite know why they're there from a puzzle, they will be boring. They just will be, because they can't be written to be interesting. So all the characters have to have an absolutely crucial part, unless they're blatantly peripheral. If they're blatantly peripheral, then fine. But if we pretend by giving them dialogue, giving them a position, that they're important, they have to be important. And we have to know what their importance is from both a narrative and a motivational perspective. So we need to know exactly what their motivations are. And the great thing is that suddenly you go, yeah, I know this character, and it's much, much easier to write, and you can write it in a really fun way. Because if you don't know what their motivation is, and you don't know what their narrative reason is, apart from just being for a puzzle, the player will see through that straight away. And as far as important, I guess in many ways, what we tend to do is focus on the things. We'll focus on, why this character is fun, and hopefully what will make you laugh, and also the importance from the puzzle and narrative perspective. And hopefully players will just instinctively know, and maybe we'll just instinctively write it so that it's quite clear what's fun. But as I say, players keep so much information, narrative information in their minds when they're playing the game, much more so than the film. And obviously they have much longer to play it as well. So it is quite a different experience, both obviously from experiencing it as a player, but also for writing it for that much time.
May I ask a question then?
I was going to chime in with a Twitch question.
Okay, is there? Okay, please go ahead.
Okay. This person has mentioned also that you, Charles, is one of his childhood heroes. So like he really likes your games. Yeah, we've had exciting conversation into Twitch chat, which I'll get into later on. But like, his question was about how Kickstarter affected the video game industry. Like after the success of Double Fine, what was the reaction of the Revolution staff? And did you launch the campaign surely without any problems, or did you have any reservations? And like, what if nobody showed up, and what if nobody funded the game? Like that was his question.
Did you call Tim Schafer prior to that, sir?
No. But we admired what they'd done, and obviously they've been very successful. Whereas, gosh, what's his name? Gabriel Knight, the writer of Gabriel Knight, had been considerably less.
Jane
Jane
Jensen.
Jensen, thank you, Jane Jensen. Yeah, had been considerably less successful. I mean, in truth, after 30 years, which is what it would have been, of writing games, what absolutely terrified me was to let down our community. And so I was particularly shocked when, and I won't talk about who, but really successful developers, I felt, treated their community with a degree of contempt, and they believed that they were just a way of actually just getting money from them. And that was absolutely not our approach. And the other thing is that I think people realized that we really were very poor, that we could not afford to write. We could have gone to a publisher, perhaps, but there was no way that we had all this money in the bank and we were just trying to get more money so that we could, get other people to pay for the game. What was extraordinary was, and I didn't know what to expect, was if you remember from the video, you get a close up of George's face. And a few people came back and went, "No, you haven't got the face quite right." Oh no, we're not. So we changed it, and we republished it, and it turned into this extraordinary circle where the people who told us were really thrilled that we were listening to their voices and actually acting on it. Which in this world, most people I think feel that their voice isn't being listened to. And from our perspective, we had the most wonderful people telling us and giving us feedback, which is exactly what we needed, because otherwise, historically, we would have relied on a publisher who was very proud of the fact they'd never played video games to tell us what they thought we should be doing commercially. So what we did is we moved to having a direct relationship with our community, which was incredible. And we genuinely really were grateful. We were genuinely thrilled to be engaged. And I think people realized that there was a sincerity there. And I mean, I can tell you, we absolutely put our backers at the top. There was one interesting situation where we'd said that the game would be DRM free. And we were working with Koch Media, who were doing the distribution of the physical version. And they had agreed to build the discs that we were going to give out for Kickstarter. And they phoned me up and they said, "Look, we can't, you haven't given us the DRM free version. So it's going to have to come out after the boxed unless you put a Steam key in with it." And I remember that moment really well. And I kind of went, "Oh God, we can't have it coming out late. We can't have it after the retail version, because really there's nothing worse than backing a game and then it being sent to you after the retail." And that's just not cool, is it?
I had to do the same. We also ran a Kickstarter campaign, and we first see the GOG and Steam keys, then their special edition boxes reached, our audience weeks later.
I know, and you can't. But what I did, which was obviously a big mistake, is I said, well, let's just use the same discs. So everything was fine until people who really care about DRM got the disc and found it was a Steam disc. And quite rightly, with every good reason, they were furious because we said it would be DRM free. And we know that 75% of people don't care, or maybe 80% of people don't care, but the 20% that do care really care. And they felt, and they were right, that we'd lied to them. So for the first time in the campaign, suddenly there was this backlash.
Mm-hmm.
And I sat and thought about it, and then I tweeted the next day. Clearly we misjudged the strength of feeling, we will of course be building DRM-free versions and sending them to everybody. And that cost us a good few £1,000s, but everybody really appreciated the fact that again that we'd listened to them. And the scary thing is, certainly the one that really is an example of how terrifying it can be was when Peter Molyneux did his Kickstarter for Goddess, and changed the perspective, moved it from what I can gather towards being a pay model, in game, and the anger built. And for whatever reason, that anger was not addressed, and it grew and grew and grew until eventually it swamped him. And that is scary. That is scary. And I hope that would never happen to us, because we genuinely had a huge regard for our audience. But I don't know if you find the same thing. But people are so generous with their emotion and their excitement and their interest. I said right from the very beginning that if we screwed it up, it would be us that screwed it up. It was ours to screw up, and as long as we did it right, it was going to go well, and it did go really well. And I hope yours went well as well.
Yeah. Like somehow we persevered, and we are still, developing games, which is a huge thing. So I think so.
That's brilliant.
Charles, please forgive me, sir. Like, it's a great honor, but I'm still at the office, and because of the quarantine measures, if I do not leave at the moment, it may be too late for me. So I'll continue.
They will lock you down
on my way home from my phone, but I got to leave you to these two really fine gentlemen.
Okay, well, look, it's lovely to get to talk to you, and Guven has absolutely promised that you're going to invite me over, and we're all going to have dinner together. That was the promise, wasn't it?
100%.
Dreadful pandemic is over.
It's going to happen. In between the next big apocalyptic virus, of course, and this one.
Well, actually, I'll tell you what I am going to do, if I'm allowed to, in August. I'm going to swim across the Bosphorus.
Wow.
Okay.
Wow.
Now it's worth to see.
You're a good swimmer, Charles?
I haven't. Well, I swam from Alcatraz. I swam from the island of Alcatraz back to San Francisco at GDC last year.
Wow.
So that was good, and I really enjoyed that. Oh, it was fantastic. It was absolutely fantastic. The problem is that there are great white sharks that attack people sometimes, or attack seals.
So we do not have those in our waters here. No worries there.
Sorry?
You might see.
You do not have any sharks in Bosphorus.
Okay.
Not anymore.
We do
no
have,
worries there.
No.
You do have Russian warships that I doubt would worry too much about swimmers.
Some of them might be called.
That's
don't know.
true. So it's an honor, sir. Take care.
Well, it's lovely. Thank you so much.
Have a great evening. Bye.
And you.
John, thank you. Take care.
Take care.
John.
Bye.
Bye.
Brilliant.
Arturo, I guess.
Yes, I had the question, but it was related with the again it's same question. I mean, I was thinking about the Kickstarter a lot. I mean, how does it affect? Where we were planning to do the same game without any Kickstarter opportunity and etc. But many of them already been answered. So.
Well, I'll tell you. I will add one thing, and it was an incredible experience. But obviously, if you state what you're going to do at the beginning, then you are duty bound. And so you are constrained by that, because obviously, you've promised to deliver something. You specify what it is. You have to deliver it. So, if there were any disadvantages, it's that you don't have the flexibility to change an approach midway through. But that's only very small. And broadly, the ability to communicate directly with 16,000 to 17,000 people is just incredible. Just incredible.
Yeah. Okay.
Related to that, though, like it must have been great to leave the publishers back and just do whatever games you wanted to make.
It is, but if I could just say that Koch Media are a publisher, and we worked with them, and they helped us with the Kickstarter. They helped us with the distribution of Kickstarter goods. They also distributed the game. So I'm not anti-publisher at all. What I'm anti is this horrible, horrible mechanism whereby you're paid a very low royalty, and then all the advances are set against that, because it effectively was why Revolution almost went bankrupt. And so the one thing that we must never do again is get into the situation where we have a similar system, because then it's not fun anymore, and we go bankrupt. It just doesn't work. And working with Sony, when Sony published Broken Sword 1 and 2, they were an absolute pleasure. Some publishers are fantastic.
Yeah, I'd like to ask that. These days we have a cyberpunk hype. So, and Beneath the Steel Sky was one of the earliest examples in terms of, let's say, a game taking place in a cyberpunk, let's say,
as a setting.
Yeah, as a setting. So, how about, like today, like if you think about the Beyond the Steel Sky and its launching time, so did that cyberpunk hype support the game in a way? Do you think? Or
I think it did. Yeah, I think it did. I mean, obviously, we were scared of publishing Beyond the Steel Sky close to cyberpunk, and then cyberpunk kept slipping, and we all know why now, don't we? But I think the hype that was created. Having said that, this pandemic has changed what people want changes depending on the events at the time, and clearly this pandemic is so miserable and so ghastly, and there are curfews in place. So we're also aware that a lot of people actually want to play light-hearted games and watch light-hearted films, and that cyberpunk, if everything was going really well, then cyberpunk as a story narrative in the background might have been more successful. So it goes both ways.
Yeah, we had March specifically for Animal Crossing, for example.
Yeah, well, exactly. Animal Crossing is exactly what people want to play in a pandemic, and cyberpunk is maybe just a little bit too close to what's really happening.
Okay, connected to this question, I guess. Having said that about the setting, I always thinking about the genres. Like in between with the 90s until 2000s, is obviously it was the time period of that adventure game genre and maybe RTS. Many things was really new. So, but the adventure was something else, if I'm not mistaken, because I was there too and I was playing a lot of adventure game. So what do you think about between 2010 and today? Like what has been changed? Because like you said, I guess what people want has been dramatically changed, right? Where do you see the genre of adventure at the moment?
Yeah. Well, so for Beyond the Steel Sky, we obviously went for a third-person direct control of the camera, and I felt that for two things. One, that the genre suited a third-person fully controlled camera. It just felt, that you couldn't look backwards; you had to look forwards. For a new adventure game like Broken Sword, then I think the point and click as a control mechanism just works really well, and I think to change it is unnecessarily is to risk alienating an audience. So of course you want more beautiful graphics, of course you want better audio, of course you want better cinematography to a degree, but my feeling is that we've all tried with Broken Sword 3, Broken Sword 4, Beyond the Steel Sky. We've all kind of changed or indeed Detroit, which was great in its own way. But at its heart, and David Cage, gets very cross with me for saying this, but at its heart, an adventure should be a cerebral experience rather than one requiring manual dexterity. So, I'm grateful for the comments on the QTE in Broken Sword 3. But, the QTE, the reason that it slightly breaks the rules is because it required you to have quick manual dexterity, which is what a controller offers. And it's very, very tempting to do that. But ultimately, when people play an adventure game, it's a game where they're kind of sitting back, looking, taking it slowly. I think they love the idea of the danger that we put into Broken Sword and the potential of dying, but they want to die. They want to only die if they make the same mistake. They don't want to have to suddenly grasp, and react very, very quickly. That's a different genre, and the genres, like in film, are very, very clearly defined. And I think that, while you've got such a wonderful wide range, I mean, I'd call Untitled Goose Game that I played the other day, an adventure, because I mean, it is in many ways. You're going around exploring the environment. You don't get killed. So the genre is wider than it's ever been before. But at its heart, I think it is about not requiring cerebral thought rather than manual dexterity. And then all of these others are sort of slightly peripheral, in my opinion.
Okay, thank you.
Does that make any sense? So I think I've talked a lot of nonsense there.
No. It makes very sense. Thank you.
Okay.
We're all related to the science of the design of game design, so I think we all understand.
Great.
Charles,
Great.
are you considering to design some multiplayer adventure games, which are especially on, let's say, PlayStation, like kind of Until Dawn kind of games?
Yeah, Until Dawn, I enjoy playing them, but it's not what I know. It's not what I know. And it's really, really, really hard writing games, as you all know. And I would rather stick to the areas that I feel I have some credibility and experience in. So it's not an area that I'm immediately. For me, it's about focusing on interesting ways to intertwine the narrative and the gameplay, but within the bounds of not making it hard to play from a manual dexterity perspective, as I was saying earlier. So no, I mean there are some great games. I mean, obviously there's also a lot of games that use, FMV, interactive movies. I don't know if you got Bandersnatch in Turkey. Did you?
Bandersnatch.
Yes. Yeah.
Which again is interesting, but it's a different. It's also on the peripheral. I mean, Bandersnatch was great, but there hasn't been another Bandersnatch as far as I know, or certainly not one that's not another interactive television experience that's caught the imagination in the same way.
There's only the Minecraft story mode that came out for the Netflix as a series.
Oh, I didn't see that. Oh,
Yeah, it was before that. It was actually a Telltale game. I believe they basically ported it to Netflix.
oh, interesting. I should check that out.
Okay. Yeah. I guess we are a bit of, like out of time. But if there are any last, just shoot them right now.
I mentioned this on Twitch, but I want to read it again.
Hello, sir. I have a question, if it's possible.
Oh yes.
Yes, sure.
Well, I'm actually working for John Oral. I'm his employee at the same time. I'm working as a game writer in Cats and the Other Lives.
Fantastic.
I have a question. Do you have any, like, a must-read book for a narrative designer person or someone who is interested in the, I don't know, like, or maybe an exercise or a perfect book? Do you have any recommendation? I would like to know.
Well, there's a book called Save the Cat.
I'm reading it
Okay.
at the moment.
Fantastic. I really like Save the Cat. It's fun and it's high level ideas, and and I think it'll make you think. But then also at the other end, is Story by Robert McKee, which now do you notice that I'm recommending film books rather than game story books, and maybe I'm wrong. I haven't actually read any game story books that I thought offered enormous insight. And besides which, games are in their infancy, and film has been around for 100+ years. So I think it's as long as we read these books and we don't take it as the gospel of how we need to do it, but we take inspiration from it, then yeah, I would also read Story by Robert McKee, because that goes into the sort of minutiae of the mechanics, whereas obviously Save the Cat is high level, thematic ideas on how your story can be made successful.
Okay, thank you so much. As a little following up question, I'm really curious about it. I'm really working hard on this story structure models. I'm reading Joseph Campbell's book and Save the Cat, and I'm following also Dan Harmon's story structure model and all that stuff. But don't you think that when it comes to making games and telling interactive stories, these story structure models are a bit too restrictive, in my opinion?
No, they are, of course. But the problem is that if you have a film or a television, then you have a script, you know what the font is, you know what the layout is, you know exactly what it looks like, and you know that for every page you have about a minute. And frankly, I don't know, you probably read lots of scripts. I certainly have. And I read scripts for films that haven't come out yet, and you can kind of tell whether they're going to be any good or not. And frankly, I don't understand why the film industry produces bad films when they could have seen at the script stage that they were bad, but that's what happens. Whereas the problem with a game, of course, is that because you've got that extra dimension, it's really, really hard to convey it, to write it down anywhere. So I'm afraid it has to stay in your head. You can write down. I mean, what I always say is that if you can write down an idea in 5 pages, then you're clear. If you write it down in 100 pages, then you probably haven't got the first clue, because anybody can write vast amounts. It's writing it down concisely that's difficult. But even then, it's all in your head. So yes, you can write the story. Yes, you can write the game design. But everything linking needs you. It's just the way it is, I'm afraid. And we don't have a way of documenting it. So I don't think we should beat ourselves up about it. I think it's just really, really difficult. And when somebody comes up with a 3-dimensional model for stories, which people are working on at the moment, then perhaps we will find a way to tell the story in that extra dimension. But at the moment, it's really difficult.
Thank you so much for the answer, sir.
Well, thank you. Good luck. Good luck.
Thank you.
And this is John, who was with us before, who had
Yes.
to leave, right? Yeah, great.
I was also gonna mention Anatomy of Story from Truby, but like we're all mentioning the same thing, same books, like their movie books, The Anatomy of Story. Truby's, John Truby's.
Oh yes, and Into the Woods as well. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, Truby's absolutely, and then Joseph Campbell, of course, is a genius. I mean, Joseph Campbell with Hero with 1,000 Faces was the granddaddy of them all. So they all feed off each other.
Yeah. Before we close, also let's mention that Mehmet Ali gives a lecture on writing in our school as well, and it's actually his birthday today.
Thank you so much, Volkan.
Happy birthday!
Fantastic.
So, any last questions at the Discord or from the Twitch chat? So, any last questions?
I think we're good.
I think we are good too.
Okay, then Charles, thank you for your time. So, I mean, it was a great pleasure to have you here at last. I mean, maybe we didn't plan it like that. I mean, we planned it that you come to Istanbul and we have you here and that. But that's still a promise. Just like I said at the beginning. So hopefully after the pandemic, we will have you here in a nice weather with very good food, definitely. So Yeah, thank you.
Pleasure. Well, maybe in August. Maybe in August, if we're allowed to travel.
Why not? Yeah, why not?
And if you don't mind, if you don't mind me seeing me in my swimming costume, then then.
And which side should we wait for you? On the Asian side or the European side?
Yeah, well,
and stream it.
yeah, it depends on the style of your, setting switch.
Yeah, no, I'll start. I hope we'll be able to do it. So, well, and thank you for this opportunity, and to everybody who's taken the time to listen or watch. And I hope that everybody stays well, and look forward to seeing you on the other side of this dreadful disease.
Hopefully. Thank you.
Definitely.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, guys, thanks so much. Cheers.
So,
care.
bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye. Thank you.
And we're off, right? Yeah.